Hello, everyone. Today, I want to tell you about a book. I am obsessed with this children's book. It's called The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, and it was published back in 1908. So I was reading it to my kids each night. It's got this rare combination of peaceful nature scenes and cozy little fireside moments, plus adventure and battles. And at one point, Toad gets thrown in a dungeon, which is the story I'm going to tell you guys today. I want to read you guys my favorite sentence ever in a children's book. And we would follow the story of the main characters. So here is Mole and Badger and Rat. And of course, he's not on the cover, but Toad is also one of the big main characters. So Toad is the daredevil. He's the ne'er-do-well. He comes from a rich family, and he has all the toys. So he's always outgrowing toys and then quickly forgetting about them. He has boats, and he's all into boating for a while, and then he scraps that hobby. And then when we meet him with those three main characters, he is traveling in a caravan, which he calls his canary-colored cart. And it's pulled by a horse. And basically, it's like an old-timey camper or an RV today. So as these friends are setting out on an adventure, Toad's canary-colored cart gets bowled over by a motor car, one of those new motor cars. So he gets really into that as a hobby, and that one actually sticks. He's not a very safe driver, and he's not a very good person in general. He's constantly getting into crashes and then getting new motor cars because he's rich. So it's clear while my sons and I are reading this that Toad is an addict. He's addicted to these latest trends. He's addicted to speed, and maybe he's a kleptomaniac as well. We'll see that in a moment. But of course, they didn't have the modern mental health language of addiction at the time, but nevertheless, his buddies recognize that he has a problem. So remember, we have Mole, Badger, and Rat. And they actually stage an intervention, but obviously they don't call it that. They realize that he's getting a new motor car after his latest crash, and they decide that they're going to save him from himself. So they arrive there at Toad Hall, and they make him take off all of his driving clothes, and they march him upstairs to his room in his big house, Toad Hall. And they basically lock him in his room and keep him in there, and they're trying to reform him. But he gets out. He climbs out, classic style. He ties the bed sheets into knots, makes a big rope, and he comes out through the window, and he walks all the way into town. And then he steals a car from some unsuspecting restaurant goers. And there he is. You can see him joyriding in this stolen car. And then he gets caught, finally. Privileged Toad. He was just enjoying all of these things for so long. But the long arm of the law finally embraces our dear friend Toad. So I told you I'm going to read you my favorite sentence. It might be my favorite sentence of any book anywhere, I'm not sure, but certainly it's my favorite sentence from a children's book. Okay, here we are. Here's Toad in his stolen car. Let's begin. Then the brutal minions of the law fell upon the hapless Toad, loaded him with chains, and dragged him from the courthouse, shrieking, praying, protesting, across the marketplace, where the playful populace, always as severe upon detected crime as they are sympathetic and helpful when one is merely wanted, assailed him with jeers, carrots, and popular catchwords. Past hooting schoolchildren, their innocent faces lit up with the pleasure they ever derive from the sight of a gentleman in difficulties. Across the hollow-sounding drawbridge, below the spiky portcullis, under the frowning archway of the grim old castle, whose ancient towers soared high overhead, past guardrooms full of grinning soldiery off duty, past sentries who coughed in a horrid, sarcastic way, because that is as much as a sentry on his post dare do to show contempt and abhorrence of crime. Up time-worn winding stairs, past men-at-arms in casket and corselet of steel, darting threatening looks through their vizards, across courtyards where mastiffs strained at their leash and pawed the air to get at him, past ancient warders, their halberds leant against the wall, dozing over a pasty and a flagon of brown ale. On, past the rack chamber and the thumbscrew room, children's book, past the turning that led to the private scaffold, till they reached the door of the grimmest dungeon that lay in the heart of the innermost keep. And that's the end of the sentence. There at last they paused, where an ancient jailer sat fingering a bunch of mighty keys. Okay, so that was the long paragraph. So there's one sentence at the end of the paragraph, but all the way up to innermost keep is one sentence. Okay, so here is the short paragraph. "Odds bodikins," said the sergeant of police, taking off his helm and wiping his forehead. "Rouse thee, old loon, and take over from us this vile toad, a criminal of deepest guilt and matchless artfulness and resource. Watch him and ward him with all thy skill. And mark thee well, grey beard, should aught untoward befall, thy old head shall answer for this, and a murrain on both of them." All right, those are the two paragraphs. So my kids at this point must think I'm a little nuts because I get so excited by all of this. And after reading that, I just felt like nourished by that passage. Like I had been hungry for this sort of writing, but I hadn't realized it. So I'm an English teacher, and I'd like to think that I have a fairly good vocabulary, but there were words that I kind of only half knew, like casket and corselet. I knew those must be some parts of armor maybe, and vizard kind of sounds like visor, and I knew that halberd is kind of like a spear, but it has like an axe part at the end. Also, I know about the rack and thumb screws, like torture, implements of torture, but I did not explain those to my kids. But anyway, that last paragraph with odds bodikins and murrain, I was just completely mystified. So murrain is just so obscure. I had no idea what that was all about. So from the sentence, it sounded like it was a curse. "Should aught untoward befall, thy old head shall answer for this, and a murrain on both of them." So I couldn't recognize any kind of Latin or Greek roots there, and I couldn't think of any Germanic cognates like similar words in English. But later I looked it up, and it does have a Latin root. So it comes from the Old French murrain, meaning disease or plague, and probably that one came from Latin mori, like to die, like mortality. But here it says that after around 1600, it was used exclusively to refer to a plague affecting domestic animals, mostly cattle. So it's such a specific curse to lay upon this old jailer and toad. So it's a perfect word to use right there. And also, right when we were reading, my sons and I looked up odds bodikins because we just thought that was such an interesting word. So it's an archaic minced oath. So we have these minced oaths in English today. So when we say like, "oh my gosh," instead of "oh my God," that's a minced oath. So you're saying something which is sort of technically a swear word, but you're softening it. So odds bodikins was a softer way to say God's body, which was an invocation of the Eucharist. That's the little bread that you get at Mass, the Holy Communion, and specifically that the belief that that is actually God's body. So swearing an oath by God's body was softened to odds bodikins. So my kids and I were just so thrilled by that word that even now, a few months later, we still just sometimes just say odds bodikins. My son actually found that word in one of the Harry Potter books, and he was really excited to find that. So it's still kicking around here and there in the culture. So not only do we have these incredible words, but the descriptions, the hooting school children, their faces lit up with the pleasure they ever derive from the sight of a gentleman in difficulty. He's just nailing these really specific emotions. Sentries who coughed in a horrid, sarcastic way. This sort of detail in a children's book is just incredible. But then you get to this jailer, and jailer is actually spelled Gaoler. So in that last paragraph, you've got this character of the sergeant of police speaking to the jailer. And I'm just thinking about Kenneth Grahame's inspiration for the style of speech that we have here. So just thinking back, Wind in the Willows was originally published in 1908 when Kenneth Grahame was 49. So he was born back in 1859. And by looking into his history a bit, I can see that his parents were born in the 1830s. So maybe we can assume that his grandparents were born at some point in the early 1800s. So I'm imagining that he's writing these characters and he's probably thinking about what his parents or grandparents sounded like. So we're already getting this 1908 English throughout the Wind in the Willows book, which is so rich and descriptive and uses a lot of words that we don't use these days. But then you've got Grahame reaching back even further to write these older characters. And you've got these phrases like rouse the old loon and matchless artifice and resource and should aught untoward befall. And all of these phrases have this kind of mock archaic twang. So you just get these layers of kind of linguistic history that you get to go through while you're reading this book. This is why I love reading old books, especially the classics. They were the best of their age, and we've still got them here to read. So probably not what most people look for in a children's book, but for me, that long, meandering sentence had me marching right next to Toad as he made his way into the heart of the castle dungeon. Those two paragraphs aren't anything like a pretty sunset, but to me, they're gorgeous. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that one little exploration of a scene from The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. Apart from this scene, there is a bit of violence when Toad, Mole, Badger, and Rat retake Toad Hall from the weasels that had conquered it while Toad was in prison. But overall, it's a children's book, and I highly recommend it. So if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. Maybe subscribe, and I would like to know your recommendations. If you have any favorite books that have beautiful scenes that you love, maybe that are connected to history. I love reading new books. I love learning new words, so send them on over to me. Thanks, and see you next time.